So this is my book review of The New Evil. I read this book over the course of 2021, not exactly sure where it was going to or what it was going to entail, preparing myself of potentially being disappointed. But this was one of those books I was actually instantly hooked on. It uses vignettes for the entirety of the book, which I feel like was the best approach to creating such a large book at 505 pages. I hadn't realized that Dr. Michael Stone was a renowned psychiatrist, having had a TV show in the past, let alone a book about the evil before this. The New Evil is a sequel, yet it doesn't feel like it. Its predecessor is The Anatomy of Evil, which first constructed the rubric to this book, though they are separate in their own right. Despite this book being a sequel, it works as a standalone piece on forensic psychology. The New Evil has a scale which spans 22 categories that describe how evil a homicide may be, due to the reasonings, actions, and general character of a person. An unofficial scale, it is really interesting that in that I had never seen a categorical structure to the reasons of homicide. Each category has its own vignette to describe and illustrate Stone's reasonings to organize these homicides. Starting at level 1, there is justifiable homicide, which includes self-defense and non-psychopathic killings. Second is the killing by jealous lovers and immature people committing crimes of passion. It goes deeper, with the category numbers increasing in severity. The scale only pertains to homicides, though, and not all crimes or non-lethal types of violence, so I feel like it leaves out potential crimes that could be considered evil, yet haven't killed anybody. Instances of gang violence seem to be mostly left out, though the book includes more examples of lone serial killers and murders due to religion and cults. The Manson family is barely mentioned in this book, which I can understand, as there have been so many of them already. Leslie Van Houten is mentioned as an example of Category 3, which is described as willing companions of killers, impulse-ridden with some antisocial traits. The book states that Leslie had undergone a significant personal change by the late 70s, and in 2002, a Superior Court judge described her as having been a model prisoner for 30 years. She completed all the programs available to her and assisted others, and the book describes her as having expressed remorse and renouncing Manson. This is a fairly common belief of those who have read about the murders and what happened after, with many people today feeling like Leslie should have been released by now. I'll go over the subject in another video one day. I can say that I agree, to a degree, but not for the reasons listed in this book. Leslie is by no means anywhere near as screwed up as Susan Atkins was. The book does categorize the others, with everyone else, Watkins, Atkins, Manson, and Krenwinkel, being at level 15, which is categorized as psychopathic, cold-blooded, or spree murderers. Another example of that category includes Dorothy Puente. The book views Leslie as having participated in the LaBianca's murders, only stabbing Rosemary after she was dead. There's a lot of debate about that detail alone, and it seems that nobody can make a decision whether Rosemary was already dead or not. Further, I have read that Leslie still stabbed the body over 15 times, which, even if Rosemary was already dead, doesn't look too good. The book contains a lot of vignettes which must have taken months to study, let alone categorize. There were popular cases in this book with people like Ed Gein, Robert Berdella, and Dorothy Puente, but also smaller, less-known cases I wouldn't have known about otherwise. I like how the discussion of crime trends was included with the mentioning of how crime was really bad in the 70s and 80s, a result potentially coming from the wars the Western world had fought recently. At the end of the first part of the book, there is a sort of category test to see how certain crimes would be placed on the scale, though I don't feel like it was too perfect. At the time that I read the book, I had gotten done with researching a lot about the Jodi Arias case. This seems omitted from the book on purpose, somehow. It was so strange to me that Jodi was not mentioned at all, especially considering how she left Travis's body in the bathroom where it partially mummified. The killing of Travis Alexander could be put into multiple categories to me. Using this algorithm, Jodi would have fit into category 9, which is described as jealous lovers with strong psychopathic traits or full-blown psychopathy, with the main heading of psychopathic features marked. Murders show malice aforethought. For the most part, I agree with this, though I believe Jodi's crime should be considered more severe, as she not only premeditated the murder, but she left him in the bathroom. Then she tried to help the police not long after. She had a mentality that seems like, if I can't have him, no one else can, which is what many men have thought before killing women. The book's example of Category 9 is the murder of Dorothy Stratton by her former husband, Paul Snyder, who is listed as having had a mentality of he could not possess the wife he viewed as a beneficial trophy. He would permit nobody else to do so. I suppose in that case that Jodi's category fits, though I still believe there's more details of severity and malice in her case in particular. Near the end of the scale, the boundaries are slightly blurred, where there are people who are talked about who didn't kill anybody, but were extreme torturers that inflicted massive injury and misery. I found this to be an odd choice because I feel like if we can add people who hurt others but didn't kill them, why aren't there more examples in the lower categories? Or why not have more categories than 22? Trying to fit in torture with homicide seems too restricted, as there can be many more crimes considered evil, that could fit into this scale, or an evil scale overall. The end of the scale section seems much more opinionated about its importance, but then again, that is my opinion. I feel like the taking of another life is the ultimate evil, because there's no way to ever bring a person back. Yet, there are fates that are worse than death. The second half of the book goes over possible reasons in the increase of evil, though there really isn't a definition of what Stone considers evil. It might be in the book, though I don't remember, and flipping through, I didn't see any. This could clarify my questions as to why some cases are considered more evil than others. What Stone does go over is the why, at least in his mind. I will admit that I don't agree with his contention of narcissism as the main root of the rise of evil in modern times. The argument is made that there were less murders and less violent crime before the mid-century because people weren't as bad or narcissistic back then. To me, this idea is absurd. Despite being a psychiatrist, which means that Stone is a medical doctor, the term narcissism is not used in the medical sense, as seen in DSMs 4 and 5. Stone calls this the new narcissism, which he states is a tendency to behave in ways that merit terms like licentious and lascivious. My dictionary defines these terms as lascivious, characterized by or expressing lust, and licentious, sexually unrestrained. Lascivious, which again means expressing lust. And just for the sake of my argument, narcissism is defined as self-love, specifically excessive interest in one's own appearance, comfort, etc. These definitions all come from Webster's New World Dictionary. Another dictionary of mine defines licentious as exceeding the limits of propriety, wanton, lewd, careless of rule and accuracy, especially in literary matters. Lascivious is defined as having or denoting wanton desires, lustful, tending to sensual desires, brutish. These definitions came from Funk and Wagnall's New Practical Standard Dictionary of the English Language Amphitype Edition, 1956. Going from these definitions, we can say that Dr. Stone saw the new narcissism as having stemmed from people that have lewd sexual desire, are brutish in nature, that are careless in the way they act. Stone makes the reach that these licentious people give themselves the license to act however they want, as the DSM, he doesn't say which one, has these as key descriptors of narcissistic personality disorder and entitlement. The DSM-5 defines narcissistic personality disorder as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity and fantasy or behavior, need for admiration and lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following traits. Has a grandiose sense of self-importance, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliances, beauty, or ideal love, believes that they are special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high-status people or institutions, requires excessive admiration, has a sense of entitlement, is interpersonally exploitative, lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings of others, is often envious of others, or behaves or believes that others are envious of them, and finally, they show arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. The idea of a more narcissistic, entitled society seems like a plausible idea, through these definitions, but this only seems to apply to a very linear type of homicide. A selfish, brutish, entitled person may have lewd fantasies and rape women only to kill them later, but this isn't applicable in crimes of passion. This doesn't completely apply with murders committed for money. These crimes can have certain aspects of narcissism, but I don't believe that it can be used as a blanket statement for the crimes described on the evil list. I can see how narcissistic personality disorder would be part of a criminal's personality, a hate crime done by a white supremacist, cult leaders believing that they and their followers are the chosen ones. But Dr. Stone's idea doesn't even pertain to Tex Watson, who he categorized at Category 15. Do I think that Watson might have MPD? Yeah, I do. But do I think he killed Jay Sebring, Lino LaBianca, and Sharon Tate because he thought he was better than them? No. He didn't do anything sexual, never said he got any sort of arousal from the murders or anything lewd in nature. Dr. Stone cites changes attributing to the rise of the new evil with things like the internet, technology in general, the rising use of birth control by women and women's freedom in general, which men did not like, causing the worst of them to lash out. This is a summarization, but these were among the underlying themes. I don't agree with Stone's theories that technology and civil freedoms have caused a rise in crime, like as if normal people have decided to randomly kill now because Facebook made them feel like it was all right to do so. Stone tries to connect narcissism with gun ownership, where gun owners are at least partially the reason why school shootings have become more prevalent. While I agree that the school and public shootings have become worse in general, blaming and belittling those that haven't hurt anyone does not prove his point, and only makes it harder to believe. The main quote I have a problem with is from pages 358 to 359, where he says, "In Australia, the government did actually get rid of the guns after the 1996 massacre committed by the intellectually disabled Martin Bryant, who, after finishing his lunch at a Tasmanian cafe, killed 35 people with his AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, the same gun used in the Parkland massacre allegedly committed by Cruz. Within a few weeks, the Australian government banned such rifles and other military-style weapons across the country, also prohibiting their import and even offering to buy back such firearms as were already owned. In the 2 decades since that incident, there have been no mass killings in their country. I just want to note that this book came out in 2019, of which it was written in 2018. The book just so happened to come into existence not long after the shooting of Parkland High School by Nicholas Cruz, who I guess at that point in time wasn't proven to officially be the shooter yet. I assume that Stone's verbiage was to protect himself legally. On page 359 he states, "In the United States, estimates point to about 300 million guns among its citizenry, 40 to 50% of which are semi-automatic. This is a bit less than the 320 people in the nation. Yet it would not be easy to persuade the politicians and American citizens to go the route of the Australians. Since one does not hunt with such weapons, they are only made for killing people. A ban would be theoretically feasible, Second Amendment notwithstanding, though the ban would be politically fraught. There are many men, after all, whose desire for owning such weapons seems based, since there are no valid practical reasons, on certain psychological reasons. There are men, that is, for whom ownership of armaments like an assault rifle reinforces a sense of masculinity, as if the typically 6-inch penis is not quite as reassuring as the 36-inch arms that they can carry visibly in their arms." Having read that and seeing it again, I just can't help but say, what the fuck? I don't understand how or why Stone would write this down and think to himself, yeah, this will get the gun owners to think like me. But I suppose that he either thought that he would be preaching to the choir, or the gun owners wouldn't be owning this book. I wouldn't doubt that he might have believed that gun owners can't even read. But what about women? Us women that feel it important to be armed. Does having a 25 mean I have micro penis envy? Is it really foolish I want to carry as a way to protect myself when I'm alone? Yes, he focused on rifles, but the blanket statement of gun owners having small peepees is childish and doesn't prove any points. Even further, it really just says, give us your guns or you have a small peepee. And you know what? What if a dude has a small dick? What are you gonna do? Why do you give a fuck about people's dicks, Dr. Stone? As a woman who likes cock, I can certainly say that size doesn't matter. Honestly, the biggest ones I've ever had weren't even good. But that's getting off point. Equating gun ownership to small penises is ridiculous and insinuates that every man with a small penis may as well just become a mass murderer. The radical mentality of belittling those you don't agree with does not help this perceived other side to come to your side. Having a side type of mentality is what is keeping us apart and what some people want, such as corporations and the government, those invested in gaining more power. For being a psychiatrist, I'm surprised that Dr. Stone would publish such a brutish, lascivious opinion, instead of an informative presentation of facts that may sway those who think oppositely from him. I believe wholeheartedly that education and a non-condescending tone is the right way to approach people, as anger, petty insults, and rising tones will only push people away from you. In my own personal experience, I have seen the shock on people's faces when I've responded to their plights with kindness and a fact or two. Do I think the United States has a violence problem? Yes, and it transcends guns. We also have police brutality, gang violence, violent unsolved murders. There are loopholes with gun ownership that can vary state by state, and some places don't have any registry at all, despite people claiming that at times the entire country needs one. I absolutely believe that we need to solve this issue in school shooters or mass shooters in general. And school shooters or mass shooters in general are part of some kind of evil. Now, in the cases of Nicholas Cruz and Martin Bryant, these were highly disturbed people with severe mental illness that needed treatment in some way. Both had been diagnosed with a variety of disorders before they committed their crimes, though I haven't seen anything about treatment done to help either of them. This is a trend I've noticed with a lot of people mentioned throughout the book, acting out and doing horrible things thanks to things like abuse, mental mental illness, and a lack of psychiatric help. Dr. Stone mentions other killers like Sung Hui Cho and Adam Lanza, who he describes as having both been severely autistic. Earlier in the book, he talked about how Lanza was autistic and his mother was a doomsday prepper, who may have fueled his fears with the world ending in 2012. The murders were committed just before the predicted end of the world that was supposed to be December 21st, 2012. Reading about these shootings, there are common traits in all of them. Some sort of mental illness, a hatred of women, lack of care for mental illness, and the killers actually telling people their plans beforehand. I see this as some type of bystander effect, the same lack of action that resulted in the death of Kitty Genovese. There was a lack of action from the police in Uvalde. The killers, like Nicholas Cruz and Adam Lanza, were able to do what they had done because no one stopped them beforehand. And these two mentioned their plans prior. This is not the only reason why tragedies happen, but another marker where prevention failed. Dr. Stone categorizes school shooters separately, depending on the person. They all belong on the scale, though someone like Gang Lu is listed at Category 18, where Lanza and Cho are viewed as level 13. Killers at this level are described as inadequate, rageful personalities, though they didn't have marked psychopathic features, but the two were profoundly mentally ill, which I agree with. There are errors in the book at times. One that stood out to me was on page 421, when Dr. Stone states that Ben Foley, the murderer of Taylor Bell, created DeviantArt. When I first read that, I was shocked because I had no idea that the creator of DeviantArt was a murderer. Well, that's not the case, and I have no idea where he got that from. Ben Foley had his own page, but that had nothing to do with the creation of the site itself. Strangely, the sources in the Wikipedia page on Taylor's death mentioned nothing about any DeviantArt page. It wasn't until I came across a blog post on DeviantArt that the poster talked about how Ben Foley had a profile on there. The username/page that Foley used is forever suspended, and in 2022, it seemed that any searches of the case, at least under DeviantArt murder, conjured only people's art, and nothing on the case. There is information out there, and I will make a video in the future on it, but Dr. Stone had it wrong. There seems to be a misunderstanding of technology by Dr. Stone, which I attribute to his age. He was born in 1933, so he's pretty old. By the time the modern technology of today came around, such as the internet in 1995, Stone was 62 years old and had lived decades of adult life. The way he wrote the vignettes in the book showed that he didn't have a real grasp of our society and its subcultures that are participated in today. One murderer gained an interest in goth culture and started listening to Cannibal Corpse. This seemed to scare Stone, and he used it as a way of identifying symptoms that the killer had something wrong with him. And yet, being a goth and listening to death metal doesn't make you a potential killer in the making. In fact, if you're a dude that starts listening to Cannibal Corpse, you're probably just a little smelly, because metalheads rarely shower. But seriously, one's music tastes has no signal that a person is a potential killer. Corpse Grinder, the singer of Cannibal Corpse, plays Warcraft and has a freaking Warcraft tattoo. That's not the sign of a killer. That means he's a fucking nerd. I like Cannibal Corpse, and I wouldn't hurt anybody. It's just music. Ideas like the ones Dr. Stone has are just remnants of the satanic panic, which I have just considered to be older people that don't understand something freaking out because they think they're supposed to. If music taste was an indicator of criminality, you could just hold a deicide concert and arrest everyone, saving the entire world. And yet, real life doesn't work that way. To me, this contention of potential evil is lazy and shows the lack of understanding within modern culture. It ignores actual markers of what makes criminal behavior, such as things like the cycle of abuse and severe mental illness. Dr. Stone uses the contention of rising rates of divorce as a possibility for evil's rise. Yes, fatherless households are more prone to derogatory behavior. But what else influences crime? I think that this is a fault of Stone's book, where he focuses on forensic psychology, but not so much on criminology or victimology. What causes people to resort to crime in the first place? What counts as real crimes, i.e. actions that go against society, opposed to actions that are only seen as illegal by the government, yet are barely accepted rules socially. Murder sounds like a crime against society, as you're taking a life that was going to be lived. But pirating games from Nintendo, not so much. Of course, a parent's divorce wouldn't be much to justify or explain the reason for murder, or else we may have seen the release of Patricia Krenwinkel 50 years ago. Many people grow up in fatherless households, and yet they don't turn into mass murderers. Both of my parents grew up fatherless. They never killed anyone. My husband has divorced parents, and he's not a murderer either. Which would actually really shock Dr. Stone because he owns guns and listens to Cannibal Corpse. Some stats on fatherless households can be found on the internet, and one from moderngentleman.net states that 47.6% of homes in 2011 lived in poverty. These were female-led households that had no spouse present. This was 4 times the rate of poverty of houses that had both parents present. So, is it really divorce's fault? Or a conglomerate of factors that causes criminal activity to begin with? I'm not saying Dr. Stone is 100% wrong on everything. I just feel like we need to look at the bigger picture here. It seems that, in life, there is never one explanation for anything. Sometimes we can find 2 or 3. Interestingly, some of the murderers in the book grew up with both parents, such as John Wayne Gacy, who was arguably abused by his father, causing him to turn out the way he did. Robert Berdella, one of the more talked about killers in the book, who Stone had a lot of focus on, also grew up with his father, that abused his kids also. Underneath the divorce theory, I think Dr. Stone might have been trying to examine whether crime is a part of nature versus nurture. It seems that the second half of the book relies mostly on nurture, as theories like modern technology and cultural changes have been the catalyst for murder. Though the book doesn't ask the question of nature versus nurture outright, I do see it as an underlying theme of the book. Personally, I think that the case is dependent on the different factors that have caused events to build up before exploding. I know that that is generic to say, but of course no crime is the same. In general, I could say that it is a mixture of both. I realize that saying why not both can simplify the potential solutions to preventing homicide. Yet, thinking of the factors that led to Martin Bryant's crimes, I feel if Western culture put more emphasis on treating those with mental illnesses and disabilities, we wouldn't have people like Martin Bryant that were bullied relentlessly, mistreated, and grew up without any guidance or supervision as a mentally disabled adult. I don't know about the systems they have in place in Australia, though in America, the treatment is virtually non existent. A cycle of abuse is one of the most apparent symptoms I have seen in these vignettes, and even cases not mentioned in the book. There are horrible mental, physical, and verbal crimes that people have committed on their family members or people they knew. It seems that, anecdotally, one of the common traits that lead to abnormal psychology and behavior is abnormal behavior observed on someone unconsensually. I wonder if crime in the later mid-century came to a head because of the wars our country fought, stigma against health and mental wellness, and stigmas against many lifestyles that we see as normal today. Younger generations may not realize that being gay, being attracted to both sexes, having depression, seeing a therapist were all taboo, even through the 90s. In some parts of the world, it is still that way. Yet, 60 plus years ago, people weren't ignored if they lived a different lifestyle. In some cases, they were murdered. One person that comes to mind is Medgar Evers, a man that took part of the civil rights movement and was a member of the NAACP, and investigated the murders and lynchings of other black people, which got him killed. He was murdered by a white supremacist that would easily fit on Dr. Stone's rubric. Any hate crime would. Focusing more on racial injustices, I feel like this is one category that can easily prove Dr. Stone's theory of evil rising mostly after 1965 wrong. While the book does mention old cases such as Albert Fish and Chester, Gillette, the crimes prior to the 40s are scant in the book. As the book focuses on the United States for the most part, I will also pull cases from my country. In my opinion, lynching and the overall murder of people just because they were a different race from yours is evil. There is the case of Randall, Aaron, and Anthony, who were 3 black men enslaved that were lynched in 1856 in Arkansas. They were believed to have killed their enslaver, James Boone, a white man. Randall was hanged, and Anthony was proven innocent. There was no evidence to convict Aaron, but a white mob grew angry and kidnapped Anthony and Aaron, lynching them. The murder of James Boone is described as having happened as Boone sexually assaulted a black woman who killed him in defense. To me, Boone was evil for the enslavement of other people and being a rapist. The lynchings of Anthony, Aaron, and Randall were evil because innocent people lost their lives due to racism. Even Dr. Stone's rubric would exonerate the woman who killed Boone as she acted in defense. In 1940, Alex Albritton, a baseball pitcher with the Negro Leagues, was beaten to death at Philadelphia State Hospital at Byberry by Frank Wynand. It was a psychiatric hospital, but a quick search on Wikipedia doesn't say why he was there. Albritton attacked Wynand, and then was subdued by the latter, and apparently was then beaten to death. Wynand was charged with murder, but was later cleared of any wrongdoing. The hospital was notoriously corrupt with stories of abuse, mistreatment, and terrible conditions. The facility had naked humans herded like cattle and treated with less concern. Charlie Lord took photos of the place between 1945 and 46, later releasing a book in 1948 on it. He said the building reminded him of the Nazi concentration camps and had a pervading fetid odor so heavy, so nauseating, that the stench seemed to have almost a physical existence of its own. Albritton's death was essentially put under the rug, his existence to be forgotten about. The facility sounds like it was at least neglecting the basic necessities humans need, which, to me, is evil. Another case of lynching appears in 1901, when Fred Alexander was arrested for the rape and murder of 19-year-old Pearl Forbes. Apparently, Democratic Party allied newspapers were purveying/instigating fear that blacks were lascivious sexual predators. Official investigations disputed if there was a rape, and only circumstantial evidence was used to convict Alexander. He was burned alive while tied to a metal rail, then lynched. How can that not be seen as evil? There is a plethora of cases like these, lynchings on black men in America accounting for many of the murdered African American people Wikipedia page. This begs the question for me, at what point do we stop looking at the scale of evil? There are many things our government has done to disenfranchise people. Political groups in the past have been proven to try keeping groups of people down. Giant megacorporations pollute the earth and dump their trash in the ocean. Poor countries are exploited for cheap labor for the sake of capitalism. At what point do we stop counting the acts of individuals and consider groups of people evil? Would any of that matter? This is a genuine question, as I don't believe a scale can truly measure and compare the evil acts of a serial killer to Coca-Cola. Yet, we the people know that killing is wrong. And we also know that the government is dumping toxic waste next to Native American reservations is wrong too. This isn't a stab at Dr. Stone, actually. It's really just a question. How big do we scale the scale? Should we have a separate scale for groups and governments? I wonder if these categories have been excluded because Dr. Stone already thought of this wormhole, or perhaps he believes that groups just don't count in some way. Maybe he never gave it any thought, or maybe he just didn't want to be another true crime book with an obligatory Nazi chapter. Despite my misgivings with the book, I actually liked it overall. The first half of the book was really good, and if you were only to read the 250 pages of that, I think you would really like it. The philosophizing part wasn't for me, but it was a step in the right direction. The second half of the book includes an alphabet of evil, which is just more vignettes. And if you like this kind of stuff, I would say to get the book. I really enjoyed it. And I'm appreciative of all the angles that it came from. I definitely have my own misgivings about it. Basically what it comes down to is that when presenting the facts, it was good. It was very interesting. But once Dr. Stone started talking about the theories of this and that, basically he lost me because he was trying to make points on things that just showed he was out of touch. Other than that, if you want a long-ass book to read, I would recommend this one.